Hey guys, it's Matthew Saunders here again, fantasy writer for another virtual author reading. Today I'm going to be reading from book 2 of the Daughters of Shadow and Blood trilogy, Elena. Elena is an Albanian peasant who lives in Kosovo about 100 years after Yasmin. Today, though, I'm going to be reading from the prologue, which takes place much more recently than that. And it's going to be a little bit of a shorter reading because I don't want to really spoil anything if you haven't read book 1. Although, if you haven't read book 1, you really should, because, my opinion is that it's pretty good. So anyway, I will get started, and then after I read the prologue, I'm going to dork out about a few things like I did in the last reading. Some interesting stuff that I think that everyone might want to know about from the prologue. So anyway, I will go ahead and get started here. Prologue. Sarajevo, Bosnia and Herzegovina, the 15th of March, 1994. The bomb didn't kill him. It had dismembered him, certainly, but it did not kill him. The man's torso and head, as well as his right arm, were found in a pile of debris on the side of Radiceva Street, opposite the bombed-out cinema. His feet and legs had come to rest a few hundred feet away. The rest of him was never found. As Police Inspector Nikola Gavrilovich stood over the mostly reassembled body in the overcrowded city morgue, a question nagged at him. Where was the blood? There was none to be found, not one drop. Impossible unless the man was dead before the shell hit the cinema, killed in such a way that he bled out completely. It was the third such body found that year. Not that anyone paid attention, not with death raining from above every day. The Yugoslav army had laid siege to the city for almost 2 years, and from their positions in the hills outside Sarajevo, they pelted the city with shells almost daily. Nikola had already lost friends and family. Everyone had. As perverted as an idea as it seemed, it was difficult to find the motivation to investigate murder on such a small scale when the mere act of venturing out of one's house to buy bread could mean death. It didn't help matters that of the other 2 apparent victims, the first was a homeless man and the second an abusive drunk whose own wife refused to claim his body. Nikola's superiors would close the case, insisting the man had died in the blast, and he wasn't in a position to challenge them. He was only half Serbian, through his mother, but because the Serbs were the ones trying to strangle the city, no one would completely trust anything he said. It didn't matter that he wanted what almost everyone else in Sarajevo wanted, a free Bosnia. Besides, he couldn't exactly tell the truth. All the signs were there, if one knew how to see them. An old threat had returned to the city, and just as certainly as the Yugoslav army brought death from above, this threat brought death from below. Placing the sheet back over the man's body and then turning to leave the morgue, Nikola resolved to do whatever he had to do to stop it, even if he had to stand alone. After all, the Serbs invented the word vampire. So, as I said in there, the prologue takes place significantly later, 1994, which was in the middle of the siege of Sarajevo, which lasted from 1992 to 1996, when Bosnia declared independence, when Yugoslavia was breaking up. The Yugoslav army, which at the time was mostly just the Serbs, surrounded the city, took positions in the hills above the city, and just bombarded the city just for 4 years, constantly trying to get the Bosnians to surrender, and they never did. During that conflict, roughly 5,400 civilians died, and in the story here, the scars of that siege on the city itself and the people become very evident, because a lot of the modern day story in Elena takes place in Sarajevo and Bosnia, and so you get to explore that and see how that siege affected the people. Again, I wanted to point out too that since a lot of the modern day story does take place there, and a lot of the characters in the past story are Serbian, there is a guide to Serbian pronunciation, Bosnian Croatian pronunciation on my website. That's jmsaunders.com. If you click on books and click on Daughters of Shadow and Blood, at the bottom you'll see a guide to Serbian, Bosnian, and Croatian pronunciation. Those three languages actually used to be considered one language, Serbo-Croatian, when Yugoslavia was one country. After the breakup, they wanted, the Bosnians, the Serbs, and the Croats wanted their own languages. So for political reasons, they're considered three different languages, even though they're pretty much mutually intelligible still. So, if you want to know how to pronounce the names, and some of them are pretty long, lots of consonants, very few vowels, you can look at that guide on my website. And then I did want to point out one more thing about what I said at the very end, where the Serbs invented the word vampire. That is actually where the English language got the word vampire, was from Serbian. It either came, through German, then French, or maybe directly through German, because at the time the Austrian Empire controlled parts of Serbia. When the word sort of came into the English language somewhere around the beginning of the 1700s. And I just thought that was a very interesting little fact to throw in, given where the modern day story went when I was writing this. That's it really for today. I will be having another reading soon where I read again from book 2. We learn more about Elena. And so until next time, just remember to be careful of the shadows.